All right, let's get started. We'll teach them in. Hopefully they'll come to the sound. We didn't quite get done with chapter 19 last week, which was the destruction of Sodom. So we'll brush that up and then move on to new territory. You remember Lot is told where to go, but he doesn't go there. The city is destroyed. Family members will soon be dead. His wife will be a pillar of salt. He's told by the angels to get out of Dodge. His reaction is, not so, not so. Something bad might happen to me if I go where you told me to go on the mountain. Something bad might happen. The city is just about to be incinerated. If he'd have stayed there, he'd have been ex-Lot. Is it not a little one? I want to go to a suburb. I want to go to a little city. I guess an application might be that most Christians want to retain something of their old life pre-salvation. Verses 24 and 25. I guess you could entitle this God's Manhattan Project. Humans, livestock, vegetation, they're all leveled. Only thing I can think of is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're told at Hiroshima that the very sand crystallized. And something of crystal is going on here. The Hebrew word is for brimstone is very much like the Greek word theon or sulfur. Revelation 9:18. Mrs. Lot was covered and crystallized. That seems like a far-fetched thing, like a fairy tale, but it isn't. She was covered and crystallized. The event is referenced 16 times in Scripture. 16 times, so it happened. If it was mentioned once, that means it happened. At verse 27, the scene shifts back to Uncle Abe. And with the sun peeking on the horizon, maybe 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, he trudges to the spot that he has devotions. He has a time, apparently, and a place, apparently, for his devotions, for his contact with God. Not a bad idea at all. We would call it, I guess, a prayer closet today. Or he's out there trying to contact God, as is his custom. The ground rumbles. He jerks his head toward the sound, and alas, it's also toward Sodom. And he sees a mushroom cloud forming and ascending. His heart sinks into his sandals. He says to himself, so, there were not 10 righteous. Brother Lot did not even win 2 people outside of his own family. And then he says, I wonder if Lot himself made it. Now he did, by the grace of God, he did. Why did God spare him? He wasn't any paragon of virtue. Verse 29, God remembered Abraham. God remembered Abraham. Lot didn't deserve to be saved from this situation, and we don't deserve to be saved, no matter what we try to do. God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. The chapter rounds out with the sordid scene of incest on the mountain. An application might be that booze, nakedness, and deviant behavior often merge into a cocktail of wickedness. You remember the story. The sisters say, while we're out here where there is no man. Well, they weren't a couple of miles from some of the cities of the plain. Let's get our father drunk and then have sexual relations with him, and we will have our children. Notice here the model of sin is the elder leading the younger into corruption, which is often the case, even in a household. Look out for the elder. because if the elder goes awry, the younger will likely follow. Man's capacity for rationalization is limitless. And the issue of this sin spawns two inveterate foes of Israel for hundreds of years, the Moabites and the Ammonites. You read this and you're tempted to think, well, surely this can't be God's crowd. Surely it's so sordid that even if it's pre-salvation, if they've contacted God and they're God's people, they wouldn't act like this. Well, the Bible says he's just Lot. Just Lot, 2 Peter 2, 7 and 8. Ruckman once made the point in a sermon that men on death row are there and they're just as saved as you are. And they're on death row. They made a horrible mistake. Bob Jones Sr., there is no sin ever committed that you aren't capable of under the proper provocation. No sin. Think about it. Well, why would that be? What provocation? The primary provocation is proximity. Proximity. You're where the action is, Jackson. You're where you shouldn't be. And if you're there, you're capable of anything if you're there particularly often enough. What could you expect after 20 or so years in this Sodom sinkhole of perversion? That's where they were reared. What could you expect? And all of this was set up by one bad decision. You never know where it's going to go when you make a bad decision. What was the one bad decision? And Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom. He pitched his tent toward Sodom rather than out in the plain where he wasn't tempted by all of the evil that was going on. My grandfather used to quote this little couplet, I guess, that goes, "Sin is a monster of such dreadful mien, to be hated need but be seen, yet seen too often, face to face. It's first despised, then pitied, then embraced." All right, we're over to Genesis 20 now. Now, as an introduction here, there are characters introduced in this set of chapters here that you're going to find all the way through the canon. And the names, characters, weaknesses, and propensities will be pretty much consistent. And they will match with their forebears or first bears all the way through. It seems as if there's a weakness, maybe genetically or something. Maybe there's some kind of spiritual genetics that we don't know anything about. But it seems to carry right on through. So look for it. Genesis chapter 20, the Abimelech ruse. The Abimelech ruse. Now Abraham, because there's rough going up where he is, heads the entourage south. South is not a good direction spiritually. And when it begins to appear dangerous, he decides on a tactic that, though dangerous, turns out pretty well for him. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." She's my sister. Now remember, she's a light-skinned stunner. She's different. She's from way up north, the northern part of Mesopotamia. She's a 10, a keeper, a showstopper. Abimelech, which is a title, means literally "my father is king." He decides to add her to his harem when he sees her. And it looks as if the mother of God's people is about to be polluted, which God cannot allow to happen. So he sends a dream to Abimelech. And in the dream, the message is, you are very close to being a dead man. If you have relations with this woman that you've just added to your harem, you're dead. You're dead. His reaction, of course, is, I'm innocent. God responds, I know. That's why I have interceded here and given you a chance to do the right thing. Give her back, or I'll just have to kill you. Now, that's kind of rough, but it's basically what God was saying. Now, of course, Abimelech does give her back after he puts Abraham through the paces. I mean, he rips him a little before he leaves him. What were you thinking? What's your excuse? Well, I knew you guys were a bunch of pagans. That's what I was thinking. You guys are a bunch of pagans? What is he acting like? You willing to endanger his wife? And yet now he's talking about how pure he is? I knew you were a bunch of pagans, and I thought one of you will kill me to get at my wife. And then he goes on and tries to rationalize a little bit and says, it's not as bad as it looks, because she is my sister, sort of. And he explains she's my half-sister. And then I married her. So it's not as bad as it looks. In the army, this is called quibbling. I didn't exactly lie, but I didn't exactly tell the truth either. I purposely misled. Quibbling. In my job at BBC, one of the things I had to do was chair the discipline committee. And we had a kid in there one time. He had thrown a water balloon at a married student as he was circling the campus, and it hit the guy's little kid. Well, of course, the man was furious, and he turned him in, described the car, maroon convertible Chevrolet, only he said red. A red convertible Chevrolet. And so we interrogated this kid, we hauled him in, and we knew probably whose car it was, and he kept denying it. No, it wasn't my car. My car was never there. And then it turned out at the end, his rationalization was, it wasn't red, it was maroon. What did we do? We shipped him. Why? For lying to the committee. You couldn't lie to the discipline committee. Now, of course, Abraham comes out again smelling like a rose because he is Abraham. And God caused this thing to actually fall out to his good. All right, Genesis 21. The son of old age. Sarah, though past the time of birthing, conceives. God moves and a miracle happens and she conceives. God has a calendar and he meticulously adheres to it. Galatians 4:4. He had promised that she would, promised she'd be the mother of millions, and now he's delivering on the promise on exactly the time that he wanted it to happen. She names the child Isaac, which means laughter. And you remember that she laughed when she first heard of this prediction. So now you got two women and two heirs in the same tent. Now that is a recipe for disaster. Strife. No more than strife, war within the tent. Now the good excuse for something to finally come to a head was that the elder was mocking her child, the younger. Mocking. We don't know exactly what that entailed. Making fun of, we would say. Maybe it got a little more vicious than that. We don't know. The good excuse was mocking. The real reason was monetary. If it doesn't make sense, there's $1 in it. Well, I've been there. I've been the elder. And then a divorce in the family. And then a remarriage. And it can get messy. Don't let anybody tell you that nobody suffers in the thing, because they do. And finally, there is a heartless demand. Throw her out. Throw her and her kid out. Get her out of the compound. Get her away from any of us. Drive her out. Now, Abraham resisted. He had bonded with the woman and the child. He did have a heart. Just throw her out into the wilderness. His argument is she'll die. There's no way she can survive out there. And the heartless reaction of Sarah is, I don't care. I don't care, get rid of her. In our culture, the woman has the whip hand. Do you agree to that? We've protected culturally the women to the extent that if there's a divorce or something like this happens, the woman wins. And if you're ever thinking about divorce, first of all, don't do it. Secondly, it doesn't make sense. You won't come out, if you're a man, on top. You'll come out on the bottom. What is the country song? She got the mine and I got the shaft. Well, that's pretty much what happens most of the time here. They get their way. There have been at least, I'd say, 8 or 10 cases since I've been the pastor here, 31 years ago now, where a male in the church marries a woman outside the church, and then they have to decide where they're going to church. Guess who wins? Every single time. Guess who wins? It's not the male. They wind up over where the wife wants to go to church. He just wants to be happy. He just wants to have an uncomplicated life. That's just the way it goes down. Well, the two are thrust out. Beersheba is pleasant today, but not then. It's rough going. I've been to Beersheba. Pretty nice today. But back then, you would have a hard time surviving outside of the environs of the camp. And of course, they almost cash it in. They're in bad shape out there. But God, as always, keeps his promise, verses 13 through 19. The kid Ishmael at length became a nomad, an archer, which is a type of the Antichrist. See for reference Esau and Nimrod. And spawns a bunch that are called wild men or wild asses. More time passes. Abraham becomes the Bill Gates of the area. He gets so rich, he even supersedes Abimelech the king and his chief general, his officer Pichol, Pichhol. Money is power. He gets it. Huge herds, gold, silver. He has so much money that he is feared. So the king and the general, a bit alarmed, seek a non-aggression pact with Abraham, who undoubtedly has a veritable private army of servants, and he's feared on the military front as well. Let's have us a non-aggression pact, says the king. And Abraham says, okay, I'm for it. I'll sign on. But first we have to clear up a little matter. You see, there was a feud among the herdsmen again over water rights. Sounds like the Old West. They're either fighting about the sheep herders and the cowmen, or somebody has water and they want it. They need it for the herd. And he tells the king, some of your boys raided one of my wells. What are you going to do about it? Abimelech says, this is the first I've heard of it. Now, he's probably telling the truth. I didn't know this had happened. You didn't bring it up to me. Of course, I'll make it right. Things are ironed out, and life goes on. We're moving quickly here. Why? Because we're behind. Genesis 22, the offering of Isaac. Now, the theme is the unanswerable veracity of fulfilled prophecy. There's a lot of prophecy in 22, just as there is in Psalm 22. Prophecy. Now, at the time of the incident, Ishmael is around 17 to 20 years of age. I don't know if we have a picture of him up there or not. We can go to Ishmael. And after the peace pact, there was a tranquil period of several years enjoyed by all. The child turned out to be a compliant dream child. He was the antithesis of Dobson's strong-willed child, if you've read the book. And as with Job, God decides it's time for a test, time to shake things up a little bit, time to see where we are. Can't get too comfortable. So God drops a bombshell in verse 2. I want you to take this child, and he's probably a young adult, and I want you to take him to a far country, Moriah, and there I want you to kill him. Sacrifice him to me. Now notice how it's poured on here. He loves this child. Take this child that you love, that is the joy of your life. I've found that grandkids are even more of a joy. If I'd have known how good they were, I'd have had them first, you know. And I ran across another country song. I don't know why I'm listening to country stations. And the song goes, all I need to make me happy are 4 little kids who call me Pappy. And that's what mine call me, by the way. Well, why do they call you that? Because I didn't like any of the other names for grandfather when I got to be a grandfather. I didn't like grandpa. Just names I didn't like. I guess I was denying reality that I was that old. But I knew that my dad, who was a pilot in World War II, his crew called him Pappy. And that was pretty common among airmen, that the head guy, the pilot, was called Pappy. I had watched a series on television about the Black Sheep Squadron, famous Black Sheep Squadron, and their leader was Pappy Boyington. So I said, I can live with Pappy. So I chose that. I don't know what in the world. I try to identify here with what's going on. What would your reaction be if God himself told you, I want you to kill your kid or your grandkid? And God makes it as tough as possible. Give up a son or a daughter. That would be giving up the thing you love most. That would be the ultimate sacrifice. If it's a boy, your name is involved. You might be cutting off your name. Your future is involved. And that's why the Baalistic deities made the firstborn pass through the fire. Pass through the fire is put them on an altar or on a statue of Baal, and while drums are beating, light the fire. The drums will drown out the cries of the baby, and the baby will be sacrificed to Baal, proving that Baal is first. All right? Our hero takes this kid to Mount Moriah, and he's supposed to burn him there as a sacrifice. Verse 3 is seemingly there's no hesitation. There's not even any soul struggle at all. The Bible doesn't say, and I've got to believe there was plenty of soul struggle. There may have been some arguing with God. I don't know. But I'll wager you one thing that I'm sure of. He didn't tell Mama. He didn't tell the good wife, I need to take our kid out and kill him. She's very strong-willed, is Sarah. The theory of the world is everyone has his price. Even selling out God for a price. There is a price that you won't pay. There is a line that you won't cross. Job wouldn't sell him out, even though it cost him everything. And neither would Abraham. Moriah is in the environs of Jerusalem. And on Jerusalem is something called the Temple Mount, which you probably can't go a week without seeing on television. On the Temple Mount is something called the Dome of the Rock. Inside the Dome of the Rock is a rock. It's a dome over a rock. Now, why would you build a dome over a rock? Because the Arabs for hundreds and hundreds of years have said this was the very rock that Abraham's son was stretched out on and a ram ultimately sacrificed. A few hundred yards away is Gordon's Calvary. And some believe that at one time it was part of the Temple Mount as well, that there was something, they removed something to make a valley there so that they could circle the city. Now, if that's true, Isaac is walking in the steps of Jesus 1,896 years before he, bearing his cross, went forth at the same place. According to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, Arvan was originally the threshing floor of Araunah, the same place. You might ask yourself, how could God do this? How could God possibly ask that of someone and nearly force them to do it? And the answer is simple but complex at the same time. He knew the outcome. He knew what was going to happen. He knew he was going to intercede. He knew he couldn't let it happen. Note also there are a number of parallels to Jesus here. I'll just take one or two. Verse 8 is particularly salient. Isaac is 16, 17, or 18 years of age. Is he up there? Looks like a full-grown man in that picture, doesn't he? That artist probably is more accurate than presenting him as a little boy, as most pictures do. We had to search around in order to come up with a picture that matched what I think. But the point is, he could have resisted his now aged father, but he didn't. He didn't. But we must move on. Genesis 23. The hero here is actually a cave. The cave of Machpelah. Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah. Our group visited this place when we were in the Holy Land, and I stood and viewed it pretty much as the camera is, except I eventually got closer and just looked down to see what I could see, and I couldn't see anything. It's the resting place of Sarah. That is what inspires the place. It's the first cemetery. It's offered free. Abraham insists on paying for it, and the price is 400 shekels of silver. 400 shekels of silver, the Bible says, current money. Current money. That is at the extant exchange rate. The price of money, as you know, changes. It actually changes daily, and there are some real sharpies who are into that they make fortunes out of knowing what's going to happen or predicting what's going to happen in the exchange rate. What is it worth today? Check the Wall Street Journal, and you'll see. Now, I've been to Hebron, which is also previously Kirjath Arba, and stood there, and inside, we were told, are the remains of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. Burial spot for all those folks. I'll repeat it in case you didn't get it. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. Chapter 24. I call this the long chapter. The long chapter, 67 verses, longest in Genesis. Has several themes. You could bust it up several different ways. It is, first of all, an historical link in the history of Israel because it's the history of the patriarchs. So it's an historical link. You can look at it historically. It is valuable as an analogical study of the elements of redemption. An analogical study of the elements of redemption. And then it is valuable as a practical guide to choosing a mate. The care that was exercised in the choice of a bride, the second most important decision of life, arguably. In verse 9, you see an oath is exacted. And the servant put his hand under the thigh. The commentary that I was reading last night said the thigh is the strongest muscle in the body. Well, I've heard that the jaw is, but I'm not going to argue. It's a strong muscle. And the idea is when you put the hand under the strong muscle, you're saying, I will do anything in my power in order to keep this oath that I'm taking. Isaac is 40 years of age. That would be, because of the somewhat still extended lifespan, about 27 or 28 today, which would make Abraham 140. And even though the lifespan is still long, longer than normal, he's long in the tooth. He's getting up pretty old. He summons, presumably, Eliezer, the servant. Put your hand under my thigh, the equivalent of putting your hand on the Bible and swearing today. I want you to choose a wife for my son, but it's going to entail a trip north to my hometown. We're going back to my digs, my environment, where I grew up. Application: when choosing a mate, background is important. I mean, it's more likely to succeed, and this has been proven many times, if you have very similar backgrounds. You don't have as much to get over. So background is important. The servant says, can I take Isaac? I mean, it's only fair he be in on the decision somewhat. And the patriarch says, no. I want to ensure his safety. Trip is dangerous. You can't take him. You're going yourself, and you're making the choice. And if your choice is not willing, and she won't come back, you're free, you're clear. I won't hold you to the oath. Well, the servant so swears. He then cut out a healthy dowry, that is a herd, a small herd, and headed for Nahor, Nahor being the home city. Application: he had something to offer when he got there. Something to offer. Is that even considered today? It used to be. In fact, it used to be called prospects. And you would have to face the father. And the father would ask you, what are your prospects, young man, if you want to marry my daughter? And what is your plan to exact these prospects? Where will you be 10 years from now, and how are you going to get there? There used to be that kind of an interrogation. You had to ask the father for the hand. Not so much anymore. I can remember in high school that toward the end of the hour, a bunch of cars would pull up in the circle of Kimball High School in Royal Oak, Michigan. These were the cars of the dropouts. These were the cars of the kids that quit in the 10th grade or 11th grade. They went out and they got a job in a machine shop or something, making just enough money to get said car. And when the bell would ring, the best looking girls of the 4,000 or so students would stream out and jump in those cars with these guys. 20 years from now, they'll still be in the machine shop. The girls didn't use their heads. They got guys that were a dead end. They didn't have a plan. They were driven solely by emotion. Now, I'm not saying be so cynical that, well, maybe a checklist isn't a bad idea, but when you're looking for a bride, at least know what you're looking for. I heard the story one time of a girl that answered the phone. She heard the voice on the other end say, "Honey, I have just inherited $3 million from my rich uncle. I also got my PhD last week, and I was offered a job at $500,000 a year. I want to drive over in my new Mercedes, and if you're willing, drive you to the justice of the peace where we can tie the knot. Will you marry me?" And she said, "Of course, of course. Who is this calling?" Now, it's okay to be rational, and being rational is not unromantic. But I suppose there should be a little romance in there too. But back to the narrative. From her perspective, what if she's not too keen on this idea when he gets there? What if she's not really looking forward to a permanent blind date? It doesn't really register with her. I've never seen him. I don't know anything about his background or anything you want me to sign on. She doesn't know whether she's going to take this 500-mile trip on a camel. Imagine that. And get there to be married to a guy who might be obtuse. That's dumb. Or mean. Or unspiritual, or lazy, or exceedingly homely. I don't even know. It isn't registered. She didn't even ask, okay, your master, what does he look like? And if the answer is, well, he's got a great personality, look out. My wife one time used to do needlepoint, and she was working on one that said you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before one turns into a prince. You got to know. You don't know. There needs to be at least some dating around, I would think. Although in these days, someone else made the choice. And I think the divorce rate was better than it is today. Does she share your worldview? Is she liberal or conservative? Is she high church or low church? Is she a Baptist or a Presbyterian? These questions need to be explored. When I was in high school, I played hockey, and on my hockey team, there was a kid who got engaged. And I asked him, "Well, where'd you meet the girl?" I met her at the Big Boy at Woodward and 13 Mile Road. He walked into a Big Boy, picked her up, and a month later they were married. Now, I don't know how it turned out. I'm going to guess not too well. He needed an Eliezer. He needed someone to help him, to pick the girl for him. Now, just in type, before we move on, this is a Gentile bride. She's from way up north. Gentile bride getting a type of Christ for a permanent union. Make that eternal security. Note, it is evening or dark when he gets there. And of course, we're in a night watch called the church age, when the bride accepts her spiritual husband permanently, Jesus Christ. Okay, they go home. The head of the home is a guy by the name of Brother Laban. He sees the baubles that were given to this girl. Some gold, bracelets, earrings, necklace, all this stuff. And he goes, whoa, this guy's loaded. And Laban is a character, a con man. We're going to find that he's not someone you want to emulate. And so he says, I'm going to keep this guy here as long as I can, and I'm going to bleed him dry. That's just the way that he rolled. $signs appeared in his eyes. Verse 35, you'll see that the servant tells Laban everything he has. Now, normally this is not a good idea. Parading your wealth, even verbally, is a poor idea. See, for reference, Hezekiah, who had cost him a great deal. But contextually, it was understandable. He was trying to land this girl for his master. All right, what are some of the criteria that would appear in this passage? What was he looking for? A checklist isn't terrible, a little bit, I don't know, unfeeling maybe. But if he had a checklist, here it comes. Compatibility, that is, they had the same background. Virtuousness, she's a virgin. Good luck looking for that today. An industrious worker, a worker bee. Healthy. My grandfather used to say, make sure you're not marrying a hospital bill. She drew for his camels. She drew for all his camels. I know that a camel can drink a lot, and yet she drew. Respectful of authority. Beautiful. Isaac probably put in a plug for that. Verse 21, and the man wondered, man, have I ever stumbled into a keeper? Now it's just going to work out. Is she going to be willing to come? And the man wondered, I guess so. A rare jewel. Compare her with the Proverbs 31 woman, and you see parallel after parallel after parallel. My brother, who I affectionately called LB, Larry Bartlett, when he was dating, as I can remember, he had a checklist. He actually had one. Because he said he was looking for a Christian Venus. Okay. She had to cook like Betty Crocker, be as spiritual as Susanna Wesley, be as smart as Madame Curie, sang like Mary Costa, play the keyboard like Cherie or Missy. I mean, she had to be the perfect woman. Well, he did pretty well, but I wouldn't call her perfect. And I remember saying to him when he was explaining all this to me, LB, what if you find this paragon of femininity and she has a list? I'll leave it at that. Criteria. Reiteration. Did lights go out or something? You all suddenly went dark, or I'm going blind. I'm not sure what's happening here. Reiteration, verses 37 through 50. Basically, the story is retold word for word. Accomplishment, verses 51 through 61. Laban needs some time to milk this cow, but the servant says, hinder me not. You're not going to keep me here. Don't do that. And finally, Laban says, well, I guess it's okay. You can go and you can take her if she's on board with this. If she says yes. If she exercises her free will, as all who accept the groom must. Sorry, hypers, Reformed theologian boys, sorry. He exercised his free will to ask her, and she had to exercise hers in order to come. She says, I will go, verse 58. I will go. And they say then, be thou the mother of thousands of millions. And she was, and she is, the mother of thousands of millions. All right, Genesis 25. Need to hurry here. The end of Abraham. By this time, the old boy is truly an old boy. Old but still vital. A fresh brood is produced from his second wife after his first wife dies. Obviously, God here performs a miracle, the miracle of rejuvenated loins. He did it for Sarah, he does it for Abraham as well. He's getting so old, though. When you get old, you start thinking about, what am I going to do with my money? Where am I going to put it? Who's going to get it? And he decides that he wants Isaac to have it. All that he had unto Isaac. He gave all that he had unto Isaac. Usually it's the reverse. The last wife calls the shots in the distribution arena because she has the old boy and has control of him. So she calls the shots. He's old, but he's still fertile. Sometimes this happens. Gypsy Smith. How many of you know the name, Gypsy Smith? All right, a couple of you. He was a famous evangelist in the first part of the 20th century. Bob Jones Sr. and Billy Sunday operated at the same time. He was a gypsy, born in a wagon in England. Very effective evangelist. Emphasized love. Well, he emphasized love in his life too. When he was about 81 or 2, he married a 20-year-old girl. It scandalized the conservative ecclesiastics. His matter-of-fact explanation, I'd rather smell perfume than liniment. Strom Thurmond, you remember him? A senator, a long-time senator from South Carolina. He was on the board at Bob Jones University. And he, when he was about 80, married Miss South Carolina, who was about 20. And he was taking some flack over it, and Bob Jones Jr. gave him the line, I'd rather smell perfume than liniment, and he used it. All right, there's a second marriage here, verse 1. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Now obviously she was much younger. Her name means covered with incense. I'd rather smell perfume than liniment. Covered with incense. People have different feelings about second marriages. What if your mate dies? Should you remarry? My wife thinks you shouldn't. Let me put it that way. Now, she can't make a biblical argument. Is she in here? She better be out here. She can't make a big biblical argument, but it's almost akin to adultery to her for something. She tells me that if she goes first and I remarry, she'll find a way to haunt me. Well, the old man doesn't want competitors for his son here. So he sends the rest of the brood away. He sends them east. Ruckman says the Arabs or Muslims are run out of Palestine. Only Sarah's son stays in the land. And by extrapolation, that would mean that the Jews should have the land today. And it is laid out, and even the parameters given in the Word of God, that Jew is going to get that land during the millennium. Secondly, twins, verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, there were twins in her womb. These boys couldn't be more different. It amazes me. I have two, Blake and Brett. They are so totally different, I can't believe it sometimes. Reared in the same household, had the same vacations, the same experiences, went to the same schools. They're nothing alike. Esau is a woodsman, Jacob a tent boy. Esau is a man's man favorite, Jacob a mama's boy. Esau is honest, Jacob is duplicitous. Esau is hairy, Jacob is smooth. They don't even look alike. And they're twins. I suppose the application, if I can skip to it here, is the danger of parents playing favorites. If you're a parent, do you have a favorite? Well, you say, I can't admit to it. But do you have a favorite? Do you favor one over the other? I picked Bailey up from school one time. She's about maybe the second grade. We're driving back. She says, "Pappy, I know I'm your favorite." And I don't say anything, so she says, "I know you can't say it, but I know I am." I never tried to even indicate that to her, but she picks up on it and she's just sure she's the favorite. Do you have a favorite? It can be dangerous. Now you remember the story. I don't have time to go into it totally. But Esau, the hunter, the woodsman, is out. He has some kind of difficulty. We don't know what it is, but he gets back, staggers back into camp, and he's in bad shape. Jacob takes advantage and secures the birthright that should have gone to the elder for a mess of pottage. He's in the kitchen. He's cooking. He's the cook boy. He's the mama's boy. The other goes out and kills the stuff, and then he cooks it. Genesis 26, a repeated ploy. Isaac is once again forced down by a famine to Egypt. At Gerar, the men show too much interest in the good wife again. The inhabitants have the morals of a 21st century singles bar or a club. When a young person tells you, "Well, we're out clubbing," that's not a good sign. That means that they're part of the meat market. So here he is. "She's my sister." He repeats it. "She's my sister." And as a tribute to him, he pulls this off for a long time, this sister stuff. But then he gets careless. You always make a mistake. You better be careful. I've likened it to laying out landmines that you're going to step on yourself one of these days if you do things you shouldn't do. He leaves the tent flap apparently open. He is camped near Abimelech's palace. Abimelech looks out the window and the tent flap is open and he is seen sporting with his wife. Hebrew takshak, sporting. Old English, caressing or petting. In other words, not acting like she's his sister. And so this triggers alarm bells in the old boy. He demands an answer. The answer is, "Well, I didn't exactly level with you." This time he doesn't even get mad, but forges another one of these pacts. Well jumping is again a problem, but it is settled again amiably. Then we skip ahead here. What have I got? 2 minutes? There is the tricking of the old man, the dirty trick. We've got a bunch of con artists here. They seem to all be con artists. And you used to be able to say why that is, and now it's not politically correct, so I won't. Isaac is blind. Maybe this causes him to think that he's dying. He wants a last meal here. The last meal is his favorite meal, venison. So he approaches the hunter, Esau, and says, "Get your bow and arrow and get out there and get me a deer, and then I'll bless you when you get back." Rebekah hears this thing. Again, the wife knows what's going on in her digs, and sends for her favorite and says, "You're about to lose the blessing. Let's hoodwink the old man who is blind. We'll trick him into giving you the blessing instead." But he's not about to die, first of all. He lives for quite some time after that. I had an Aunt Jenny, who was my grandmother's sister, who when she was around 45 or 50, sent out Christmas cards saying, "This is my last Christmas. I won't be here next Christmas. Just want to say goodbye to everybody." 30 years later, she's still alive. David, 1 Samuel 20, verse 3, around 24 years of age, thinks he's one step from death. He's just about to cash it in. Well, he lives 46 more years and dies at 70. John Wesley, famous Methodist preacher. John Wesley wrote his epitaph at 32, convinced he was going to die. Then he lived 51 more years and died at 88. Maybe Isaac is a bit of a hypochondriac here. All right, the ploy exercise: get some goat meat, present it to your father, and get a blessing. And the kid says to Mama, "Well, what if he feels me? He'll feel that I don't have hair. My brother's hairy." She said, "I'll fix that. I'll get some of his clothes out, and you can wear that, and that'll make you smell like him. And then I'll put something over your arms and the back of your neck, and he'll feel probably the back of your neck, and it'll be hairy once I put this on." Well, it worked. The old man's a bit suspicious, but it works, and he gets the blessing. Esau, understandably, is not too happy, and he plans to kill his brother. And brother, he's a man's man. He's capable of doing it, and everybody knows it, particularly Jacob. So Rebekah sends him off. But guess what? She sends him off thinking that when everything dies down a bit, you can come back. She never sees him again. Sowing and reaping. Sowing and reaping. You live as a con artist, you die as a con artist. Well, to escape Esau's ire, that necessitates another trip north to secure a connected wife. Now we're looking for a wife again. We're going to have to stop right here, and we'll join him on his search for a wife next time. I'm really almost done, but it would take me probably 5 minutes, and you need a donut.